Hi, this is Delegate Leslie Lopez of District 39, and you're listening to the Conduit Street Podcast, the best source of news and notes on Maryland politics and policy. The Conduit Street Podcast, the official podcast of the Maryland Association of Counties.
You're listening to The Briefing Room here on the Conduit Street Podcast. I'm Dom Butchko. This is episode 3 of our 5-part conversation on energy. In episode 1, we laid a foundation of who the major players are shaping energy policy. And in episode 2, we talked about the role of the PJM. Today, we're breaking down where our energy comes from. The source of energy is an important question for counties because siting has often been controversial. Where these facilities are physically located has a major impact on communities and regions, and the externalities of one generation source over another can raise complicated questions for policymakers. Our guest today is intimately familiar with this balancing act. We're joined by Kumar Barve, Chair of the Public Service Commission and former Chair of the House's Environment and Transportation Committee. Chair Barve, welcome to the Briefing Room.
It's great to see you, Dominic. I miss you from the days when you would testify in my committee and we'd work on issues. And so it's great to see you and talk to you.
I know, but now at the PSC, you can't get rid of me.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. No, the one thing I just want to say about the Public Service Commission before we go into a lot of these details, it's not a legislative body. It's not, in the old days in the legislature, you'd come to my office and you'd tell me what your position was, and then somebody else would come in and tell me what their position was. Of course, we'd have a public hearing, but we could have private conversations like that with you and the people who disagree with you. At the Public Service Commission, it's a judicial process. Everything has to be transparent and in the open. You can't just come to my office and talk to me about a case that you're concerned about. It has to be in the open. And so you can talk to me. It just can't be on a case that we're hearing before us. So it's kind of it's a different sort of situation.
Thank you very much for that primer. The Public Service Commission is definitely a bit of a different animal compared to probably what most folks who are listening to this are used to. Jumping into our conversation, let's start with, where do Maryland's electrons come from? When I hit the lights on in the morning, where is most of our power generated?
Okay, so to begin with, Maryland imports from surrounding states about 40% of its electricity. But of the 60% that we generate, the biggest chunk is from the 2 nuclear reactors in Calvert County at the Calvert Cliffs facility. That's about 40% of our electricity. Another 36 to 39%, depending upon uptime, downtime. Another 36 to 39% is natural gas generation. 6 to 12% is coal. It used to be a lot bigger, but the industry has been moving away from coal, and I can explain to you why that is. It's not because of the Sierra Club. Okay. And then about 13% is renewable, and renewables, of course, include solar, and there are 4 basic categories of solar, which I can go into if you want me to. There's wind in Western Maryland. Hopefully, we'll have at some point offshore wind off of Ocean City, Maryland. And then, of course, there's the Conowingo Dam, which generates electricity and can also serve as sort of a battery when you pump water up into it in order to then flow it through the turbines when you need electricity at nighttime. Stuff like that. So, it's mostly nuclear and natural gas. Coal is being phased out by industry. And I think a lot of the people, certainly in the Trump administration, they want to say, oh, this is the liberals and it's the environmentalists. It's really not. What's happening is natural gas is shutting down coal. And to put it very bluntly here, I listened to a fossil fuel generator executive talking about the fact that same size output plants. A coal-fired power plant has 5 to 6 times as many employees as a natural gas plant, and that makes them more expensive. They have more scrubbing equipment, which is complicated and has to be maintained. And just generally speaking, coal is a dirtier way to generate electricity, and there are a lot of maintenance issues. Even if you don't care about the environment, the maintenance issues associated with coal are substantial. And so more and more industry is phasing them out. Talon, which is the company that owns the Brandon Shores plant, they chose to shut down their plant. State government didn't make them do it. I mean, they chose to do that. And in Texas, I mean, Texas is a fairly red, conservative, free market state, right? They've decommissioned 7,500 megawatts of coal, and they've replaced half of it with natural gas and half of it with renewables. A lot of people don't know this, but Texas right now is the number one developer of solar, wind, and batteries, believe it or not. And
I was going to say they're a huge leader in renewables, but also in fossil fuels because it's all market driven.
That's right. It's all market driven. And the irony in all this is a lot of conservative Republican legislators in the Texas legislature have been trying to put in bills to limit the use of renewables. And the oil and gas industry has opposed them because how ironic is this? The oil and gas industry likes using cheap solar electrons to run their oil rigs.
It's like that one show on Paramount Plus, Landman, where the main character talks about how the windmills are powering all the oil pumps and how it's all really connected.
Yep, that's right. And a lot of these oil and gas companies are diversifying their portfolios and getting into renewables also. So yeah, it's, believe it or not, Maryland's grid is not as dirty as one might think. I mean, nuclear is very clean and very safe, but it's expensive. That's the downside of it.
Are you seeing a lot of growth? I mean, the big thing in the 2025 legislative session was solar. Everybody was talking about solar. There was some other talks about nuclear, and put a pin in that because I want to go down that little rabbit hole too.
No, it wasn't just solar. It was also natural gas.
Natural gas as well. That was the other one. So there were 2 or 3 bills in 2025. The Renewable Energy Certainty Act was primarily solar and batteries. I'm blanking on the other one, but the other one was natural gas and nukes.
Next generation.
Yes.
Yeah, the Next Gen Act. And that was one that basically said that if you want to burn fossil fuels to generate electricity, as long as, to make it simple, they basically said, if it's as clean as natural gas, you can do it. If it's not, you can't. So that more or less excludes oil and coal, which...
And didn't you have to switch the plant after a certain amount of time? It had to be able to transition to hydrogen. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes, that's right. It has to technically be able to do that, but the Public Service Commission has to sign off on it. And the thing is, hydrogen is just prohibitively expensive. It's just ridiculously expensive. So that, while that's technically a requirement of the law, it won't happen. It's too expensive. Unless there's some tremendous technological breakthrough, that's not really a thing that's going to happen.
Setting the table here, we generate 60% within the state. We import 40. Nuclear really big, natural gas really big. But again, that big focus was on solar and wind. Are you seeing an uptick in solar and wind trying to come to Maryland?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, solar and wind is being deployed all throughout the United States, and especially in states like Texas, where in West Texas, there's just nothing out there. They've been building. In Maryland, obviously, in large rural areas, there's a lot of land, and the law that was passed last year basically put a limit to 5% of the land area for prime soils, which means
in priority preservation areas.
Right, that's right. Yeah, and you're right, and which means 95% can't be touched by it. So yeah, I mean, but right now the thing, it's not just solar, but we have a procurement out there for battery storage, and there is more of a role for battery storage to be deployed in helping transmission and distribution, because the energy ebbs and flows, and And during peak moments, rather than building another wire to bring in more electricity, it makes a lot of sense to store electricity in the middle of the day when electricity is the cheapest. That's another thing your listeners have to be aware of. Unlike going to the grocery store and shopping for apples, the price of electricity, the price for electrons changes depending upon the time of day. In the middle of the day, it's the cheapest. At the end of the day, when everybody gets home and starts to cook dinner and watch TV, and that's when the price of electricity becomes more expensive. And there are a lot of companies that have as their business model harvesting electricity in the middle of the day and then cheaply and then making a profit selling it at 8 o'clock at night. And so that's a market that we want to encourage. We are right now working on, rather than just using Maryland funds to procure battery storage, we are in the process of working on a walk-up tariff, meaning you will get this much money for your battery services. We have to price it very carefully, and it's going to take us over a year to do that. But we want to create that market because the real foot race here, right now, renewables need natural gas in the evening time or when the wind isn't blowing. And that's very expensive. Those natural gas plants that only run during peak times, because they're not running 24 hours a day, they're expensive. And so the real economic foot race is between peaker natural gas plants and batteries. And batteries are right now more expensive, but they're getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And I think at the end of the day, people are just going to build batteries and not have those peaker plants. I think that's what's going to happen in 10 years.
I want to talk to you about nuclear. Right now, if you look at the EIA, the Energy Information Administration, a federal agency, about half, a little over half of our power right now comes from nuclear, again, from those two facilities at Calvert Cliffs. I know this is a conversation that has been going on in Annapolis for a while, since I've been there. Why not just expand Calvert Cliffs, or why not get some of these micro nukes? What is your thoughts and answers there? Because I know this is a particular topic you've been thinking a lot about.
Yeah, so nuclear, let me just describe the economics of nuclear. These plants last for 80 years, 80 years. But they're paid off. The investment is paid off in the first 30 years, so they're very, very expensive. Then once they're paid off, they go from being one of the most expensive ways to generate electricity to the cheapest way to generate electricity. It's just it's a drop off a cliff in terms of the cost. That's the problem. It's the upfront cost. Now, right now, we hear rumors of is it Microsoft or Amazon? Amazon, I think, has been putting out feelers to saying, well, we're thinking about building a third nuclear plant at Calvert Cliffs and putting a data center right there. There are so many questions to be asked about that. Like, okay, you're going to build a 1,000 megawatt nuclear plant. How many megawatts do we get, and how many do you get? Are you going to take up all the electricity and it kind of doesn't help the grid? At what price will utility customers pay for that electricity? There is just a myriad of questions that have to be asked and answered there. But the rumor is that that's something that's being looked into.
Don't you think, though, there's pretty considerable public policy questions? And by the way, I'm not looking for any right or wrong answers. I'm just spitballing here with you. But when you look at something like solar, for example, where the footprint is massive, or you look at something like natural gas, where it might be a smaller footprint, but there's other environmental externalities, aren't those upfront costs, like those long-term investments, just like we invest in our highway, just like we invest in broadband? Like for nuclear, it seems worth it to me to make those infrastructure investments.
It does, but I mean, what you have to understand also is that Maryland is a deregulated state, which means we don't build the utilities don't build generation plants. I mean, in the old days, take Brandon Shores, for example. We directed them to build a coal-fired facility, and we specifically said coal because that was during not too long after the oil crisis, and we wanted to have America run on American energy. And so it specifically was the RFP, the request for proposal, said coal. So when we deregulated, what we decided instead to be is a state where we regulate BG&E and Pepco and Delmarva Power and Light. They get the electrons from the national, well, from the PJM grid and move it into your wall socket. We regulate the price they charge for that distribution. But every 90 days at the Public Service Commission, we actually conduct an auction. And like at the last auction, I think 15 or 17 companies offered to supply electricity to our utilities, and we picked the lowest prices. And so it's a supply and demand. We go and say, all right, maybe you, Constellation, win this time, NextEra Energy, maybe they win the time after that, but it's always the lowest bidder. So the question is incentives to bring nuclear into Maryland. First of all, because we're deregulated, it's hard for us. We can't just pick up the phone and call Constellation and say, hey, you need to put a nuke in Calvert Cliffs. The area there is big enough for 4 or 5 reactors. We want another reactor. We can't, we don't have the ability to do that. But the whole issue of creating incentives to bring nuclear into Maryland, this is a big conversation. There's no direct way to do that. My personal view is that the U.S. federal government is going to have to subsidize these things and have the taxpayers pay for it, because in this whole area of power, natural gas, water, all these utility areas, there are only 2 types of people who can pay for things: ratepayers and taxpayers. And the taxes in the United States are the income tax is very progressive. If you made a decision to say we're going to increase taxes on millionaires, or whatever, or just take money, borrow money in the market, and we're going to create this gigantic incentive for building nuclear, I think that's the only way it would really happen. And then the conversation will be where to put it. Well, there's a big benefit to having generation in your state, because electrons are lazy. They want to go to the place of least resistance, and that's usually the place closest at hand. And so we have a proposal to build about 714 megawatts of gas-fired generation in northeastern Maryland, and I think I can't remember, it's Cecil or Calvert County or Harford County, I can't remember. But those electrons are disproportionately going to benefit Maryland ratepayers because they're just physically close to them, and so. That's the way you have to look at it.
Kind of on that, that's actually a great opener to my next question. Before, you mentioned that we were a net importer, generate 60% domestically, everything else comes from our neighbors. Has that historically always been the case? Is that a new phenomenon?
Yeah, it has been for the last 30 years or so. We've been a net importer, but the proportion that we imported has been going up slowly over time. My understanding is that, let's say 1990s, Maryland imported like 20 to 25% of its electricity, not 40%. So the trend has been toward importation. And, look, in states in the Northeast, especially, it's hard to find places to put power plants. Local communities and local governments object to these things. You expect that. Local communities don't like transmission lines either, as we have seen, which I can't comment on because we have 2 big cases before us. But that's just.
I was going to say, Piedmont who? Who even brought up Piedmont?
I don't even know what you're talking about, but but the point is that is a trend you see everywhere in the United States, except in states like Texas and Oklahoma, where to be fair, they have big swaths of empty land in their states where nobody is going to object, and so that's sort of the way it goes. But so Maryland, as coal has been pushed out by natural gas, we haven't been building natural gas fired power plants. Now, people ask the question rather, why don't we just build those natural gas plants where the coal plants in Brandon Shores are? And the problem with that, or the cost associated with that, is you'd have to build a big honking gas pipeline. And if you think overhead transmission lines are expensive, they are nothing compared to an underground gas conduit, a pipeline. And so there is a gigantic cost associated with that. I mean, one of the reasons that I know that on the Eastern Shore, people in Ocean City, they object to offshore wind. I understand that. But one of the things about that is that you could never build a natural gas pipeline there to build a gas plant in an isolated spot on the Eastern Shore. I mean, that would be prohibitively expensive, and the ratepayers would have to pay for that. On the other hand, the Eastern Shore is transmission constrained. They don't have enough transmission. Putting offshore wind right in the ocean there and putting electrons directly in there would help to alleviate a lot of those electricity constraint problems right off the bat. And again, the vast majority, I know people will say, well, we're not going to get the electricity, but again, electrons are lazy and they will mostly be used on the Eastern Shore.
So that's actually, I feel like you read the notes before, because that is a perfect transition to the next part. We were talking about generation. Now let's talk about demand. We're building, we're importing, these electrons are going places. So what is the demand profile in Maryland like?
Well, Maryland isn't a heavily industrial state, so we don't have, large steel smelting. Now, we do have, the Port of Baltimore is a gigantic user of electricity. So Trade Point Atlantic uses a lot of electricity, and all the investments going in there are going to need more electricity. But for the most part, Maryland's electric load, we use the term load for demand. Maryland's electric load is people like you and me, people who work in an office, work from home, do stuff like that. Increasingly in the PJM, and we live in this grid, you explain this to your listeners, we all drink from the same, cup of coffee, basically, in terms of electricity. Data centers are popping up all throughout that area, and they're creating demand. One estimate had it that something like 40% of the anticipated increase in demand or increase in load is due exclusively to data centers over the next 10 years, for example. And that is a gigantic change from where we were just 3 years ago. I mean, it's kind of funny how when I was appointed to the Public Service Commission in 2023, none of us talked about data centers. It was just not something we thought about. And then all of a sudden, in the capacity auction that PJM runs, all of a sudden there was a gigantic increase in demand without a corresponding increase in supply, and that pushed up the capacity prices in a way that's felt by ratepayers. Nobody who pays their electric bill has ever thought about capacity auctions, but this has a real,
But now they are.
But now they are, right. And so, the mantra that many have taken to is BYO NG, bring your own new generation. We don't want to have some data center say, you know what, we're going to go to Calvert Cliffs and we're going to gobble up 1/4 of their electricity. And that means all the rest of us don't, get a big loss. We want them to bring new generation. And under the law that just passed 4 days ago, right? 4 or 5 days ago, they have to, the data centers are also required to pay for the cost of transmission upgrades that would be required for their facilities. So the whole idea is to get them to pay for the demand that they're creating. And hopefully other states will do the same thing. But the real fear, the real worry for me is that there will be some states who decide to say, well, you know what, we're going to give away the store, bring your data centers to our state. And while their consumers will pay the most, everybody in the PJM will have an increase in cost. And so it's our hope that neighboring states will take the same kind of attitude that we do.
I will say, I will just kind of put a little flagpole here. So our next episode, actually episode 4, is going to be all about data centers. So Mr. Chair, I appreciate the primer because it's the biggest thing in energy.
But let me just tell you another interesting thing I learned about data centers. Certain kinds of data center activities can be paused during shortages, like artificial intelligence, chat GPT, things like that. If you ask a data center to reduce its energy output by 20%, like in January for Winter Storm Fern, they can do that. They can actually reduce it. But the data center functions that support like your banking app, commercial apps and functions like that, they have to be able to run 24/7. So then the complexity comes up. How do we how are we going to keep track of what kind of software is being run at this particular data center? And, it makes it even more complex, but at least there is some flexibility to say that in a time of crisis, it's 105 degrees outside in July, and the data center is going to have to reduce its demand by 10%. They do have that ability. And of course, part of the problem also is that a lot of them have very dirty backup energy. They have diesel generators. And
so that was a League of Conservation Voters. That was a big thing for them in 2025 and in 2024 when we were talking about a number of the energy bills.
That's right. That was a concern having to do with the Frederick County quantum loophole development area.
So I do have another question for you. We've talked about this with PJM, but I'm curious on your perspective. So this past summer, for the first time in the whole PJM region, had to do a forced blackout, and it was small area outside of Baltimore. It was limited in duration as well as the geographic impact. And thank God, first time we had to do it. Are you worried that as data centers grow, as we have challenges getting more generation up or more transmission, that's going to become a bigger and bigger problem?
Yeah, I mean, I am concerned. And I'm not just concerned because of data centers. I'm concerned because of climate disruption. We're going to have freakish weather events more often. We all sense it. We see it. I don't ever remember hurricanes being a thing that I had to worry about so much. When did that happen? But that's all part of climate disruption and climate change, and that's driving a lot of these things. Now, I have to say that BG&E actually handled that situation pretty well. They had a functional VPP, which stands for virtual power plant. They were able to use demand management and batteries, mostly demand management, to deploy to keep the grid fairly stable. But as time goes by, we're going to rely on that a whole lot more. One thing that people don't think about that much, but which is a real important part of the solution, is demand management, the ability to get businesses and some residential customers to agree to have their electricity reduced during moments of crisis. That by itself can depending upon how aggressive you are, you can get rid of about 90% of those crisis situations in the hot summer and the cold winter.
I have two more kind of lightning round questions for you as we kind of start to wrap up. First and foremost, you're chair of the Public Service Commission, probably during one of the most consequential times to be in energy policy.
I know, isn't it great?
Yeah.
I love it.
Talk about right place, right time. Where you sit right now, what does the future look like when we're looking out 5-10 years, when people are remembering, the grand Kumar days at the PSC? What are we going to be looking at?
Everything. I mean, we no longer have the luxury of being able to say, oh, we can't have that solar there, or we can't have that natural gas plant over there, or we can't have wind in this place or transmission in that place. I mean, we have to basically, we can't say, oh, I'm not going to participate in demand management if I'm a major user of electricity. We have to do everything. That's it. There is no silver bullet, Dom.
So one final question. We're at the halfway point in our series on energy, and we've covered a lot, but there's also a lot of stuff that we haven't covered. You sitting as the chair of the Public Service Commission, what is the biggest takeaway for folks who are interested in energy policy? They're listening to this. What's the one thing you want them to walk away with?
Well, I think I sort of said it, that we don't have the luxury of being able to say we can't do this or we can't do that. Although, let me just be clear about this. The Public Service Commission follows the law, and we take very seriously seriously the legal requirement that we judge each of these facilities. And we have rejected solar facilities. We've rejected various projects in the state of Maryland because they weren't up to snuff. They didn't comply with the law. So we do look at every project individually, and we judge them individually. I think what you need to understand is that in this whole issue area of power and natural gas and other utilities, the answer is almost never, we're going to do this 100% or that 100%. It is a balancing act
And
because
it's nuanced too.
it's very nuanced. We have to live by the regulatory compact. We have to live by the court precedents that have been set over the last 100 years. This whole enterprise of having regulated monopolies in America is over 120 years in duration. And in many ways, the issues we're dealing with now are not too unlike the issues that were being dealt with in the 1950s and 60s when everybody started getting air conditioning for their homes, and all of a sudden electricity demand was spiking 6% a year. And so this is what we're going to have to live through. And, the thing is, why is the electricity rate so expensive? Let me answer that. Most of it is infrastructure. And to a great extent, the reason we have so much infrastructure is because of the Snowmageddon in 2010 and the derecho in 2012. People had very low electricity rates, but they were angry about the fact that some of them didn't have electricity for a week or 2 weeks, and they wanted us to fix that. And the utilities and the Public Service Commission fixed it by building more wires, more poles, more substations, more of everything. And we have a fairly robust grid, but it's an expensive one, unfortunately, as a result. So now we're having to refocus our attention on affordability, and that is job one for us, is affordability.
I like ending on, this is something we've been through before. There's been other times energy rates have gone up and we've been able to, cross that bridge, and we'll be able to do it again. I like the positive ending. So this feels like a good place to close. Chair Barve, as always, it is a pleasure talking with you and having you on. Thank you very much for joining us.
Absolutely, Dominic. I'd love to come on again if you will have me.
There'll be part 17 of our conversation.
Find a reason to come to the Public Service Commission and testify on behalf of MACO. I challenge you.
Challenge accepted. And on that note, let me read us out. Remember to like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. The Conduit Street's Briefing Room will be out on Tuesdays with our normal show on Fridays. Don't forget to register for MACO's annual summer conference, August 12th through 15th in Ocean City, Maryland. And thank you, everyone, for listening to The Briefing Room here on the Conduit Street podcast.